Okay guys, so this is the first online lecture where we'll be continuing with production. The last thing we would have done was look at Lagrangian functions. So now we're going to continue. First of all, we can graphically depict the budget constraint. And remember, the budget constraint looks at the total cost of employing labor and capital, whatever is confined within your total budget. So in this case, remember we have we would have had in our last example a budget constraint of 4L plus 7K is equal to 163, right? This would have actually been used to form the second half of our Lagrangian function. Now we could depict this graphically. Just remember that this 4 denotes the wages per unit of labor, and this 7 denotes the cost of capital per unit of capital. Right? So we can depict this graphically as an isocost curve, which is simply denoted by this diagram here. Right? It's just simply a straight line going from one axis to the next, where on the vertical axis we have capital and the horizontal axis we've got labor. So other than this, we can actually depict the first half of the Lagrangian function, which is the production function 10L plus 0.5 10L to the power of 0.5 times K to the power of 0.5, right? Remember, this is your Cobb-Douglas function, and it denotes your total quantity or your total output, Q. So you can denote this as a downward sloping curve, right? And that is known as the isoquant curve, right? And the equilibrium point would occur where the isocost line meets the isoquant line, right? Like this. So wherever the isocost line meets the isoquant curve, right, which we had here, the isoquant curve, the isocost line, wherever they meet at point E, right, that will denote your equilibrium point. And at point E, we will derive, or we will see our optimal amount of labor, which is 20, and the optimal employment of capital, which is 12. Okay, so the equilibrium occurs at point E. So that's just a graphical depiction of basically the whole Lagrangian function exercise. Now, we can use the isoquant curve to depict what happens if you were to increase the level of labor and increase the level of capital employment. So let's look firstly at labor. A labor-intensive expansion of output. So if labor increases from this point 1L to 2L, right, that will cause our output to increase from Q1 to Q2. So it'll be illustrated by a simple outward shift of the isoquant curve, right? But look at the vertical axis here. Capital remains constant, so that's why we put a bar above K, right? Then you've got capital intensive expansion, right? So now they've held labor fixed and increasing the capital employment. So capital employment, we look at the vertical axis, it increases from 1K to 2K. In this regard, the output curve or your isoquant curve will shift outward from Q1 to Q2, right? But again, labor remains fixed, which we have L bar denoting that labor is constant. Okay, so here we see that output, we see graphically output increasing due to labor-intensive expansion. Here we see output increasing due to a capital-intensive expansion. And now if you have both a labor and capital-intensive expansion, again, the isoquant curve shifts from Q1, right, where you will employ 1K and 1L. It shifts outward to Q2, where you're employing 2K and 2L, right? Simple. So now we can also apply these isoquant curves to the concept of returns to scale. Remember, we would have looked at return to scale as well when we introduced the Cobb-Douglas production function in the last lecture. So the return to scale concept deals with increasing return to scale, decreasing return to scale, and constant return to scale. Now remember, to find return to scale, you simply look at the powers attached to labor and capital. If the sum of those powers are equal to 1, it's constant return to scale. If they're less than 1, it's decreasing return to scale. And if they're greater than 1, it's increasing return to scale. So how do we depict it graphically? So first of all, let's say that you've got your initial isoquant curve, Q1, and at Q1, the output is 100. right? Where there's 1K and 1L employed, output is 100. Now let's say you were to double your labor and capital. So capital goes up from 1K to 2K, labor goes up from 1L to 2L. And this will result in an outward shift of the isoquant curve from Q1 to Q2. But observe that the new level of output is 250. So you go from 100 to 250. Your inputs were doubled, but your output more than doubled. Okay? So instead of going up from 100 to 200, it went up from 100 to 250. So it more than doubled. It increased by a more than proportionate amount. So therefore, that would be increasing returns. Okay? Meaning that your output increased by a more than proportionate amount relative to the increase in your input. Now you're looking at decreasing returns. So with decreasing returns, let's say your initial output is Q1 at 10,000. Okay? So at 10,000, you would have employed 1K and 1L. But then if you double your inputs, so it goes up from 1K to 2K, and from 1L to 2L, you double your inputs. So in this instance, the output goes up from 10,000 after doubling the inputs to 15,000, right? Now, this means that your output has only increased by about a half, okay? So in this instance, doubling labor and capital led to a less than proportionate increase in output, okay? Meaning that you would have doubled your inputs, but output increased by only 1.5, okay? Right, now we look at constant returns to scale. So here we doubled our inputs again. You moved from 1K to 2K, 1L to 2L. Output increased initially from 1,000 to 2,000, okay? In this instance, when you double your inputs, your output doubled. So there was an equal proportionate increase in your output relative to your inputs, okay? Increase in the inputs. So that means you've got constant returns to scale, okay? Now let's look at economies of scale. So what is economies of scale? Now we should all be familiar with this from our year one microeconomics course, right? This is simply a reduction in the average cost of production when your output increases, okay? So it's lower average cost whenever your output increases, right? Now, we could graphically depict this by a downward sloping curve, right? Now, this curve is known as the long run average cost curve, right? Vertical axis here, we have cost, and the horizontal axis, we have output. So as output increases, right? As output increases, we see cost going down. Hence, the arrows are pointing this way. Output increases, cost is going down. So this denotes economies of scale, okay? Now, you've got various types of economies of scale, and here's a few examples. First of all, you've got purchasing economies of scale. So this is essentially like basically buying in bulk. You know, when you buy in bulk, you tend to obtain each unit cheaper. So that would be purchasing economies of scale. Then you have managerial economies of scale. So let's say you have a very large company. But in a large company, if you only have, let's say, 2 or 3 managers, and those managers will have to spread their skill set over various departments, okay, which is not optimal. It is not optimal, and therefore that'll be quite costly. However, if you have a large company with several managers, okay, 1 manager per department, then that will result in managerial economies of scale, because that individual can therefore implement the concept of specialization, where he focuses on only one particular area, okay, and in doing so, tasks will be achieved much faster and at a lower cost. So that's managerial economies. Technical economies of scale. Well, technical economies of scale is when you start using technology, sophisticated technology, which in turn reduces your cost per unit, right? Then you've got financial economies of scale. So financial economies of scale, essentially, when you go for a loan, this is an example, when you go for a loan in a financial firm like a commercial bank, if you're a larger company, larger companies are deemed less risky. So larger companies would tend to attain their loan at a cheaper cost or at a cheaper interest rate compared to a small company. If a small company goes for a loan, they usually tend to pay a larger interest rate compared to a large company. And finally, we have advertising economies of scale. So with this concept, it means that an industry is so large, comprising of several companies. So when there is advertising for one particular company, another company will actually benefit from it. So it's because the industry is so large and these companies are so well known. Okay, so if you were to advertise the company A, because company A and company B basically offer the same types of products, company B will essentially benefit from that from that advertising done by company A. Then you have diseconomies of scale, which is the exact opposite of economies of scale. So basically, your average cost goes up as your output increases. Okay, and that's where there's a disadvantage of being too large. If the company is too large, then sometimes you can't manage it properly, and that's a classic example of certain state enterprises and certain state entities, like various ministries and public companies, etc. So if you look at the curve here, initially it starts to slope downward, but then it hits this low point and then it starts to slope upward. So this portion of the curve denotes economies of scale, which is what we would have demonstrated here. But when it starts to slope upward, it means diseconomies of scale. So as output were to increase, the cost level goes up, okay? Indicating a higher average cost when you have diseconomies of scale. So as output increases, the cost per unit of output goes up, okay? And again, we say it could be caused by bureaucracy and manning or overstaffing. So bureaucracy, let's say you have a state entity, a state enterprise, or a ministry, government ministry that you have to deal with. Here in the Caribbean region, especially in Trinidad and Tobago, whenever you need to get a simple procedure done in a ministry, let's say planning, let's say you want to put up a small factory, it could take you over 253 days, according to the World Bank Ease of Doing Business report, just to get that building permit to put up a factory. Because you have to go through several processes, a lot of red tape, satisfy a lot of documentary requirements, a lot of financial requirements as well, and sometimes you might have to pass a bribe here or there. It results in a significant amount of red tape. And whenever processes take very long, it's not just the time factor that you have to consider, there's a cost factor as well. Time is money, right? Whenever it takes a long time to complete a particular operation for an organization, it means it costs them because it delays their operations, okay? So that's an example of this, of what leads to this economies of scale. Then you got overmanning and overstaffing. Classic example of that, Petrotrin. You've got a company, a large company, yes, but they've got so many managers, so many employees. There's this example I like to use where if you want to change a light bulb in a company such as that, you have one individual to hold the ladder, right? Then you have another individual to climb up the ladder. And then you have a third individual to take the bulb, hand it to the guy on the ladder to screw it inside. So that's 3 people just to change a bulb. Obviously, that's overstaffing. And obviously, if you are paying several individuals just to complete one simple task, you're increasing your cost of doing business. You're increasing your cost per unit. So that is another reason as to why companies, especially large companies, tend to suffer from diseconomies of scale. Now we come to the concept of perfect competition. Now, perfect competition exists where there are a significant amount of buyers and sellers in a market. And none of them are essentially price makers. None of them tend to really dominate the market. There's several characteristics of perfect competition. The first one is that all companies tend to have a key objective of profit maximization, right? But then neither of them, or none of them rather, are price takers. Because the market is so competitive, the market is the one that sets the price. No company has any influence, be it because of size or whatever the case may be. None of them have the ability to be a price maker. They're all price takers. Their cost curves are identical, meaning that they have very similar cost structure, and there's no government intervention. The government essentially does not intervene to regulate these markets whatsoever. Of course, that is strictly theoretical, because in this day and age, most countries, if not all, tend to have some form of government intervention in the markets, as really at the very least as a regulator. Then there's homogeneous commodities, right, where each commodity offered, or the product offered by each company carries the same function, and it's also of the same or similar quality. The factors of production are perfectly mobile, and there's freedom of entry and exit of companies. Now, this last point is extremely important to understand in the next few graphs that we're going to look at. Freedom of entry and exit, meaning that the companies operating under perfect competition can enter the market and leave the market whenever they want to freely. Now, in the short run, under perfect competition, companies can make either profits or losses. But in the long run, however, they will not make profits or losses. They will only break even. So let's look at the short run profit scenario. Okay? So here you have on your vertical axis the price, and the horizontal axis quantity. All right. Now you have your cost curves here and your revenue curve. And again, these curves should be very familiar to you from your year 1 microeconomics course. This curve here denotes your average cost. This curve here denotes your marginal cost. And this flat line is the price curve, which is also equal to your marginal revenue, equal to your average revenue, which is equal to demand, equal to price. Now here, what you find is that your average revenue is greater than the average cost. So let's say we're producing, well, I forgot to write in here, but we're producing at this level here, right? Call this level Q. We're producing at Q. So the production level is OQ. And at this production level, the average cost would be O, this area here, right? The average cost will be this area here from QB. Okay? Now, if we want to find our total cost, it'll be this region here. O, we read it off the average cost curve. OABQ. Okay? There's supposed to be a Q here. So your total cost will be OABQ. And your total revenue, now remember this is your price curve, and revenue is total revenue is price by quantity, right? So your total revenue would be OPCQ. So obviously the area OPCQ, right, is much bigger than the cost area, your total cost area, which is OABQ, right? And it's greater by this amount here, the shaded region. So this shaded region denotes total revenue, which is this part here, minus your total cost, which is this region here. Okay? So this revenue, this region here, the shaded region, is your total profits in a short run scenario. Okay? Now we go to losses. Again, the firm is producing OQ, right? But here your average cost curve lies way above your average revenue curve. Okay? So your total cost will therefore be OABQ. Remember, you read it off the average cost curve. So your total cost is OABQ, right? Your total revenue, remember revenue is price by quantity. So here you have your price, this is your quantity. So your total revenue is OPCQ, which is much smaller than OABQ. So the difference would be the shaded region here, right? Your total cost being greater than your total cost being greater than your total revenue, right? So the difference would be PABC, which is your total losses, right? Again, this is the short run scenario. However, we could go on now to look at the long run scenario, where firms will only break even. They will not make profits or losses, they will only break even. So if profits are earned in the short run, what would happen? Because there's freedom of entry into the market, attracted by these profits, new firms will want to enter into the market. Okay, remember, there are no barriers to entry. So more firms will want to enter into the market. Okay, when more firms enter into the market, what's going to happen is that it will basically push the price down. And pushing the price down is going to, it will therefore cause your total revenue to be equal at some point. At some point, it'll get to a state where your total revenue will be equal to the total cost. Okay, and of course, that means you break even. Right? On the other hand, if the firm is making losses, then, or if the firms are making losses, they may not want to continue to be a part of that market any longer. Because there are no barriers to exit, they will leave the market. And when you leave the market, prices will therefore tend to go up. And if prices were to go up, then that means that then your total revenue is going to go up. So at some point, your total revenue is going to meet your total cost, and you would break even. Okay, so in the long run, firms under perfect competition will break even, but in the short run, they would either earn profits or losses. Now we come to the concept of the shutdown point. Now, a firm, in the short run, even though they're making losses, once they're able to cover their average variable cost, their minimum average variable cost, they can stay in operation. So meaning, once the price per unit is equal to the average variable cost, the firm can stay in operation. Now, first of all, what is the variable cost? Remember, again, from your year one microeconomics courses, your total cost of a company is made up of two components: fixed cost and variable cost. Fixed cost is the type of costs that is that degree of cost that does not change, or it does not vary with production levels. So production can be however high or low, that cost remains the exact same. So for example, it could be rent as one example of fixed cost, right? Salaries would be another example of fixed cost. Now, on the other hand, if production levels were to go up, right? Or sorry, if production levels were to vary, then that means your variable costs will vary. Whatever costs vary with production, that is known as variable cost. Okay? And the sum of your fixed costs and your variable costs will obviously equal your total cost. Yeah? So the average variable cost would be your variable cost, right? Divided by your total output. Okay? Variable cost divided by total output will give you your average variable cost. And again, in the short run, the firm must at least be able to cover the average variable cost. If they cannot meet it, at least that, then the firm will shut down altogether. So your minimum average variable cost is also known as the shutdown point, or your shutdown price. If price is less than that, the company has to shut down. If it's equal to or greater, the company can continue in their operations even if they are making losses. Okay? Okay, so now we're going to look at cost. We start off using an example. So let's say this is your total cost equation here. Now your total cost in this example is Q squared minus 10Q plus 5, where Q is quantity, right? Or output. Now again, remember, total cost is a combination of your fixed cost and variable cost. Fixed costs are costs that are fixed. They don't vary with your output levels. So therefore, in this equation, the only element that does not vary with Q or output is 25. So you could say your fixed cost of this total cost equation will be 25. This aspect here, however, Q squared minus 10Q, this part here, it varies with Q. Okay? So this part here, Q squared minus 10Q, would be your variable cost. Now, the first part of the question wants you to find an expression for marginal cost. And as I told you all many times before, the marginal of any variable is the first order derivative of that variable. So the marginal cost will be your total cost differentiated. Okay? So if we're differentiating your total cost to get marginal cost, that would simply be 2Q minus 10, right? There's no Q here, so that 25 drops out. So you got 2Q minus 10 is your marginal cost, okay? So finding the fixed costs. Now again, as I told you guys, the fixed cost is essentially cost that does not vary with output. So you could say that Q is equal to 0. And you substitute Q is equal to 0 in this equation here. Okay? So you essentially end up getting 0 squared minus 10 times 0 plus 25. So fixed cost would be 25, but that is the portion of total cost that does not vary with Q. Right. Thirdly, find an expression for average fixed cost. So average fixed cost would be your fixed cost divided by your total quantity. Or in other words, the fixed cost per unit produced. Okay? So the average fixed cost will be 25, or your fixed cost divided by Q. Okay? Now, let's look at another example here. Given the equation, again, total cost is 1/3 Q to the power 3 minus 3 times Q squared minus 3Q plus 5. So this is your total cost. Marginal cost, again, marginal cost is your total cost differentiated. And that is going to be equal to, well, 3 times 1/3 gives you 1. So you got Q, 3 minus 1, 2. So Q squared minus 6Q minus 3. Okay, this 5 drops out. So Q squared minus 6Q minus 3 is your marginal cost, or your total cost differentiated. Secondly, we want to find the quantity at which marginal cost is at a minimum. Okay, now, whenever you want to find the quantity at which marginal cost is at a minimum, you simply differentiate the marginal cost. Okay, so we know that our marginal cost is Q squared minus 6Q minus 3. So the lowest point of this marginal cost, your lowest marginal cost, would simply be this differentiated. Okay, your marginal cost differentiated. When you differentiate this, you get 2Q minus 6, right? This 3 drops out, is equal to 0. Okay, again, when you want to find the minimum, right, of any cost factor, when you want to find the minimum cost of any type of cost, you simply differentiate that, right? So marginal cost differentiated would be 2Q minus 6 is equal to 0, right? And then you solve for Q. So here you have 2Q is equal to 6, therefore Q is equal to 6 over 2 is equal to 3. Okay, so again, you want to find the minimum marginal cost. You simply differentiate this marginal cost and equate it to 0, then solve for Q, right? So I've written it down here to find minimum average cost, right? You differentiate your average cost and equate it to 0. Minimum marginal cost, differentiate it, equate it to 0. Minimum average variable cost, you differentiate it and equate it to 0. Simple. Now let's look at profit maximization. So the maximum profit, right, your profit maximizing quantity would exist where your marginal revenue is equal to your marginal cost. Okay, so remember that when you want to find your profit maximizing quantity level, that would exist where your marginal revenue is equal to your marginal cost. And of course, we know that whenever you want to break even, simply break even, total cost is equal to total revenue. Well, let's look at an example here. If you have price is equal to 100 minus 2Q and total cost is equal to 5 plus 20Q, right? The first one, we want to find an expression for total revenue. Now, total revenue is found by price times quantity, okay? We've been given a price equation here, 100 minus 2Q. So 100 minus 2Q, right, is price multiplied by quantity Q. You'll get 100Q minus 2Q squared, okay? Secondly, we're asked to find the marginal revenue. So marginal revenue is the first order derivative of your total revenue. Okay, we have total revenue as 100Q minus 2Q squared. Therefore, if we differentiate that, we get 100 minus 4Q. We also wish to find, thirdly, the marginal cost. If marginal cost sorry, your marginal cost. Your marginal cost is the first order derivative of the total cost. Total cost is given in the equation as 5 plus 20q, right, up here. So we're differentiating 5 plus 20q to get the marginal cost. That'll simply be 20. So marginal cost is 20, okay? Now they ask us for the profit maximizing quantity level. Again, profits are maximized where your marginal revenue is equal to your marginal cost, right? So we equate marginal revenue and marginal cost here, right? Marginal cost, put it on the right. It doesn't matter where really how you do it. So 20 as marginal cost is equal to 100 minus 4q, right? So 4q, therefore, when we rearrange that, 100 minus 20 will give you 80, so 4q is equal to 80. Therefore, q will be 80 over 4 to give you 20, right? So your profit maximizing quantity will be 20. Now we want to find the profit maximizing price, okay? So we know that quantity, the profit maximizing quantity is equal to 20. Now, do we have a price equation? We do have a price equation, 100 minus 2q. So all we have to do is substitute the profit maximizing quantity in our price equation here, right? So substitute q is equal to 20 in p. You get 100 minus 2 times 20, which is 40. So 100 minus 40 is 60. So our profit maximizing price is going to be equal to 60. Okay? Now let's look at another example. Given total revenue is equal to 8q and total cost is equal to q squared plus 4q plus 2. Firstly, we want to find the profit maximizing quantity where marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue, right? Again, remember, profit maximizing quantity exists where marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue. So our marginal cost is the first order derivative of your total cost. Differentiating this, therefore, to get 2q plus 4, okay? So your marginal cost will be 2q plus 4. Your marginal revenue is the first order derivative of your total revenue, and that's equal to 8, right? So your marginal revenue is equal to 8. Again, profit maximizing quantity exists where your marginal cost is equal to your marginal revenue. So you equate them to get 2q plus 4 is equal to 8. Therefore, just solve for q. Rearranging it, you get 2q is equal to 8 minus 4 to give you 4. Q will be equal to 4 over 2 to give you 2. Okay, so your profit maximizing quantity is equal to 2. Secondly, we're asked to find the profit maximizing price. Okay, profit maximizing price. Now, here we have Q is equal to 2. Do we have a price equation? No, we don't. But we have a total revenue equation. Remember, total revenue is equal to price by quantity. Okay? So total revenue is 8Q. So 8Q is equal to price by quantity. Not so? Because your total revenue is price by quantity. 8Q is given as total revenue. So you can say 8Q is equal to price by quantity. Therefore, price, or P, right, when you rearrange this, P would be equal to 8Q divided by Q. Now we know that Q, your profit maximizing quantity, is equal to 2. So you could substitute 2 as Q in this equation here, right, to give you 16 over 2 to give you 8. Or you could simply just allow the Q's to cancel out and you get 8. Right? Simple. So our profit maximizing quantity was 2, our profit maximizing price is 8. Right? Now we want to find the average fixed cost at the profit maximizing level. Okay? Average fixed cost at the profit maximizing level. Remember, the profit maximizing quantity is 2. Our fixed cost was therefore 2. Right? That, remember, the fixed cost is the portion of your total cost that doesn't vary with Q. Okay? So your fixed cost is equal to 2. Your average fixed cost will therefore be 2 over Q. Right? Or your fixed cost spread over your total quantity, fixed cost per unit. They ask us for the profit maximizing level, and the profit maximizing quantity is 2. So therefore, your average fixed cost will be fixed cost over Q, which is 2 over 2, right? Your profit maximizing quantity to give you 1. Okay, so your average fixed cost in this instance is going to be equal to 1. Fourthly, what is the total quantity the firm can produce if it wants to stay in business given an average variable cost of 6? Okay, and remember, the average variable cost is your shutdown point. The firm must meet at least its average variable cost in the short run in order to stay in operations. Even if they're making losses, once they can cover the average variable cost, once the price is equal to, at the very least, average variable cost, the firm can stay in operation. So our average variable cost is, of course, your total variable cost divided by Q. Okay, variable cost over quantity. So what is the variable cost in this equation here? The variable cost in this equation here is Q squared plus 4Q, right? So you take this variable cost component and divide it by Q, right? Variable cost over Q. And when you divide that, you get Q plus 4. Okay? So Q plus 4 is your average variable cost. And we're told that the average variable cost is equal to 6. So that means Q plus 4 is equal to 6. Therefore, we can find the lowest quantity the firm can produce when your average variable cost is equal to 6 by simply solving for Q here. So Q would therefore be equal to 6 minus 4 to give you 2. So your lowest quantity the firm could produce would at an average variable cost of 6 would be 2. Okay, average variable cost will therefore be Q plus 4, right, equal to 6. Q would therefore be equal to 2, the lowest quantity the firm could produce. Right, now let's take a look at another example again. We've got total revenue is equal to 8Q minus 2Q, and total cost is equal to Q squared plus 20Q plus 12. So the first thing, again, we want to find our profit maximizing quantity. That's the point where your marginal cost is equal to your marginal revenue. Our marginal cost is your total cost differentiated, which is going to be 2Q plus 20. The marginal revenue is your total revenue differentiated, which is going to be 16Q minus 2. We equate them to get 2Q plus 20 is equal to 16Q minus 2. So therefore, when you rearrange, you get 20 plus 2 is equal to 22, is equal to 16Q minus 2Q, or 14Q. So 22 is equal to 14Q. Therefore, Q is equal to 22 over 14 is equal to 1.6. So our profit maximizing quantity is equal to 1.6. Secondly, the profit maximizing price. Now, our profit maximizing price, again, we were not given a price equation here, but we know that total revenue is equal to price by quantity. So that means it's 8Q squared minus 2Q is equal to P times Q, as we've specified it here. Okay, so therefore, price would be equal to 8Q squared minus 2Q divided by Q. Okay, so Q cancels out with this Q here, and it goes into Q squared, and you get, therefore, 8Q minus 2. So P is equal to 8Q minus 2. This is our price equation. Now we want our profit maximizing price. For that, we need the profit maximizing quantity. Okay, so P would therefore be 8 times 1.6, which is your profit maximizing quantity, minus 2 to give you $10.80. So our profit maximizing price is $10.80. Thirdly, we want to know the value of the average fixed cost. Average fixed cost is going to be equal to your fixed cost divided by Q. In our total cost equation here, our fixed cost is equal to 12, the only component of this equation that does not vary with Q. So fixed cost is equal to 12. Therefore, your average fixed cost will be equal to 12 over 1.6 to be equal to 7.5. Remember, we divide by 1.6 because 1.6 is what our value of Q was derived to be. Okay, so that's equal to 7.5. The fourth one, we want to find out what the lowest quantity of the firm, the firm can produce is going to be given an average fixed cost of $40. Okay. Sorry, this is actually supposed to be an average variable cost of $40, not fixed cost, average variable cost, right? There's an error. So the average variable cost, as we know, is derived by your total variable cost divided by Q. Variable cost divided by Q. So variable cost over Q, or variable cost is Q squared plus 20 divided by Q, and that's going to give us Q plus 20. Okay, we know that the average variable cost is equal to 40. So if your average variable cost expression is Q plus 20, we can equate that to 40. Therefore, Q would be equal to 40 minus 20 to give you 20. Okay, so your lowest quantity the firm could produce given an average variable cost of 40 is going to be equal to 20. Now let's look at a final example. Total revenue is 7Q squared minus 2Q. Total cost is equal to Q squared plus 40Q plus 8. And we're also given an average variable cost of 182. We want to find firstly the profit maximizing quantity. And by now we should know profit maximizing quantity is a marginal cost. It would be your marginal cost equal to marginal revenue. Marginal cost is your total cost differentiated. Okay, when we differentiate this, you get 2Q plus 40. Okay, this 8 drops out. And when we differentiate the total revenue, you get 14Q minus 2. Okay, we equate them. 2Q plus 40 is equal to 1/4, is equal to 14Q minus 2. Okay, so 2Q plus 40 is equal to 14Q minus 2. Right, so 40 plus 2, when you rearrange, is equal to 14Q minus 2Q. So therefore 42 is equal to 12Q, therefore Q would be 42 over 12 to give you 3.5. So Q, your profit maximizing quantity, Q would be equal to 3.5. Secondly, your profit maximizing price. We can substitute our quantity of 3.5 into a price equation, but we don't have a price equation. We have to use the total revenue equation and work it out from there. Total revenue is price by quantity. Our total revenue function is 7Q squared minus 2Q. So we can say 7Q squared minus 2Q is equal to price by quantity, right? Therefore, your price would therefore be 7Q squared minus 2Q divided by Q. Okay? And that's going to give you 7Q minus 2. So your price equation is 7Q minus 2. We want to know the profit maximizing price. For that, we need to use the profit maximizing quantity. Profit maximizing quantity is 3.5. So we substitute Q is equal to 3.5 into 7Q plus minus 2. So 7 times 3.5 minus 2 gives you 22.5. Okay, so your profit maximizing price is 22.5. Thirdly, we want to find the average fixed cost. Okay, your average fixed cost is equal to your total fixed cost over Q. Okay, fixed cost over Q. So your fixed cost from this equation here, your total cost equation is 8. Only component that doesn't vary with Q. Yeah? So average fixed cost would be 8 over Q, which we found to be 3.5, to give you 2.29. Okay, so 8 divided by 3.5 will give us 2.29. And fourthly, the lowest quantity for the firm could produce given an average variable cost of $182. Okay? So we know average variable cost is equal to $182. What is average variable cost? It's your variable cost divided by quantity. Variable cost would be that component of your total cost equation that varies with quantity. So you have a Q squared plus 40Q. Q squared plus 40Q divided by Q will give you Q plus 40. Okay? So variable cost divided by Q will give you Q squared plus 40Q over Q to give you Q plus 40. So we know average variable cost is equal to 182. This is the expression for average variable cost. So therefore we could say Q plus 40 is equal to 182. Therefore, Q would be 182 minus 40 to give you 142. So the lowest quantity the firm could produce given an average variable cost of 182 would be 142 units. Okay? Now, this is the end of the very first online lecture. I want you all to pay careful attention of how we solve these questions in particular. Okay? At the very beginning, we looked at several cost curves, a lot of theory. You know, I don't like to focus too much on theory. Okay? My exam will be your final exam is going to be predominantly calculations, solving these types of questions. So pay careful attention, especially to the quantitative aspect of this particular lecture and how we go about solving these questions. Okay? Please feel free to email me, send me an email with any questions or doubts or anything you need clarified about this lecture. Thank you very much.